We are live. Woohoo! Check it out. We
All
are
right.
live, and we
Yay.
are live. We've worked our way through a myriad of the gauntlet of technical difficulties, only to find ourselves together again back here online. Welcome to LeaderSHIP 2.0. For those that might have had a little history with us, you might have seen our show on Fireside. This is probably a year ago or so, and we called that LeaderSHIP Happens, which I thought was a very clever title. And but I like this idea of LeaderSHIP 2.0, one, because we're rebooting the show, but also because it's a new era of leadership, and we'll talk more about that as we go. But before we get too far into this, I can't tell you how happy I am to see your faces, to hear your voices. Our leadership team actually also has a fourth, Jon Weirauch, who today is taking care of his daughter who's fighting COVID. She's okay, but he's playing dad, as he does so well, his number one responsibility. So, but I have with me today, and for your listening and viewing pleasure, Kristina Holle and Angelina Frost, and I couldn't be happier. So, and I'll start with Kristina. Tell us, for the audience who's never met you before, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're broadcasting from, and kind of what your heart says about, if you were to give us an elevator pitch as to introduce yourself for the first time. All right.
Okay, well, hi everyone. My name is Kristina Holle. I am the founder of Holle Consulting. We create work cultures that thrive, and we actually help leaders step into a higher level of leading that kind of is connected within. So I am here in Canada. Yeah, the weather is changing, so it's beautiful here, and we're just, I don't know, we're doing great things here. So I'm very happy to be here. So thanks, Mojo.
Awesome, Kristina. And also just give a little bit of your background. I know you spent a number of years in HR.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I'm laughing because to say this bio, I'm like, okay. But I have over 25 years HR leadership experience, multiple organizations, global, national, unionized, non-unionized. I've been dealing with leadership forever. But and I'm an author. I wrote a book, and now I've shifted to carry out and work with organizations independently. So it's been pretty amazing.
And before we move on to Angelina, tell us the title of your book, Kristina.
Oh, The Authentic You, Unleash Your Leadership Potential. Thank you.
The Authentic You, Unleash Your Leadership Potential. That's a great title, by the way. I love it.
Right, thanks,
all right.
Thanks.
Kristina Holle. So what a privilege, what a pleasure to have you, and Angelina Frost, also, who comes with a wealth of experience. These are two of my favorite people on the planet. They're articulate, they're smart, they're bright, they're fun. We've connected over music, we've connected over spirituality, and now on leadership. It's so important for us to be able to share and collaborate together. I'm thrilled. So, Angelina, introduce yourself to the audience. Tell us a little bit about you, where you're broadcasting from, and what you're working on now.
Thank you. I have one question before we move forward, though.
Yeah,
where can we find Kristina, and where can we find your book?
Oh my goodness, absolutely.
We'll get to that. We'll backtrack to that.
Okay, all right.
Hold that for
right
later.
At the end.
Hold that for later.
Okay.
Yep, at the end.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep.
So I'm Angelina Frost. I am currently hailing from Buenos Aires, Argentina, where I have family and where I am attending to family things while I continue to develop my my offering to the world. Leadership is it's kind of Kristina and I have something in common that I'm just learning right now, is that we both have a background in HR. And I spent a lot of time as a part of a boutique recruitment firm where we were basically an extension of the HR team, and we would help them find their executive talent. So leadership has been kind of in my wheelhouse for, again, somewhere around 25 years. And then as things started to shift in 2008, I found myself really feeling like I needed to be more in the world in a way that felt like I was more aligned with purpose. And it was through that inquiry that I wound up finding myself involved with an organization called the Engage Network, and they were coming forth with a leadership model that was rooted in purpose and helping people to really drop into what even is purpose, And so I facilitated that course for a couple of years, and eventually ended up becoming the director for the San Francisco Bay Area for this coursework that was happening there back in the late 2000s, early 2010s. And that was what really put leadership more onto into my universe, because I'd always been a natural leader, but I hadn't really actually ever thought of myself as that, really. And I think that we are in a time right now where we have an emerging paradigm at the same time that an old paradigm is
Yes.
passing. And so I really feel that
Totally
this is
agree.
how I can help support leaders to get like anchored into purpose and get happy, or
Yep.
about their service.
Well put. So
Thank
the
you.
emerging paradigm, thus Leadership 2.0. That's super appropriate. Fits perfectly with the title of our series here. This is the episode number 1 of this relaunch, or this reboot. I'm Joseph MoJOE McCarthy. I went to Pepperdine for organizational development degree, my graduate studies. It was an executive program, and so although Pepperdine is on one of the most beautiful campuses in the United States, in looking over the ocean in Southern California, I was only on the campus for commencement because we were a cohort group and we met at different locations each time we got together. But the cool thing about that is that we met in different parts of the world. So one of our cohorts was in Mexico, one was in China, one was in Canada, several in the United States, to give us the actual experience of international business as well, international leadership. So that was really my deep dive into the leadership world. That was from 2000 2002. And ever since, I've just been acutely hyper aware of leadership and how it affects everything. As John Maxwell says, everything rises and falls on leadership. And I think he's actually right. And as Angelina alluded to, oftentimes we don't think we're a leader if we don't have the title or the office or the whatever that might be. We think leaders are those that are at the top. But the truth is, we're all leaders of something, and even if it's just ourselves. And that's part of our discussion as well, that leading yourself is actually where leadership begins. It's not where it ends, but it's certainly where it begins. While I'm talking here too, if each of you would, in the public chat there, if you type in your website or the place that you think people would best find you, that'll be part of the public record. There's actually 2 chats. This is our first time on StreamYard, people, so bear with us. So there's 2 chats. One says private chat, and that just goes to the 3 of us. But there's the public chat. If you type in your website there and hit return, it'll show up in the chat for people who want to find that later. So I have not yet. Oh, Angelina, I don't know if you said you published a book. Can you tell us the title of your book?
Yeah, I have a number of books that I've written, and I've never done any official publishing. They've always been little handbooks that were designed to offer a gift that was valuable to people that I would potentially work with, right? I've only very recently shifted the focus of my practice and my service to leadership specifically. So, but you can go to angelinafrost.com/gift, and you can find a copy of a book called Connection.
Yeah, very good. Awesome. I have, as I think I've told both of you, I have the complete manuscript of my first book. It's 33,652 words at the moment. And it's not specifically about leadership. However, it does segue nicely out of what I said about leadership begins with us. It's a collection of stories from my childhood adventures in Montana and then my global travels. I've been to 30 countries in all 50 states. And so I have a unique perspective by having been exposed to so many worldviews. Angelina, we lost your video. I don't know if that's intentional or not, but there we go, and you're back. Okay, so that's a lot of introduction, and I that's absolutely necessary, especially because this is round 1 of this new series. Jon Weirauch will join us in the future, and he can introduce himself later. But so what I'd like to do with the 2 of you is just kind of have a roundtable discussion. Just for those who are watching, we didn't script this out. We don't have any bullet points we're going off of. This is really sharing our own perspective and our own experience. And I personally find that incredibly valuable. We're not trying to PowerPoint anybody to death. We're just trying to share true stories of both the great models of leadership and not so great models so that we can learn. As I like to say in almost any platform I'm on, I'm not the guru, I'm not the answer guy, I'm the question guy. And I fully believe, as Tony Robbins teaches, that questions are the answer. So really the 3 of us are here to ask and answer questions not as the final authority on anything, but exploring together these principles and just how they apply in the real world and how they can make an enormous impact in a life, in a community, in a group, in an organization, and ultimately in the world. So without having any specific question, I'm going to go back to you, Kristina, and say,
yeah, I can jump in.
Yeah, I knew you could. I can see it on your face. So
I'm like,
take it from there.
ooh, I love this topic.
Yes, please jump in.
One thing I will say, there is a need more now than ever. And maybe it was always there, but I think post-COVID, things kind of changed where people started doing deeper level reflection. There is a need to understand emotions. Like emotional intelligence is a real thing. Emotional intelligence is your inner compass, and it's how you drive and you get your insights. The issue with organizations, typically, like even with clients that I've worked with, I've been fortunate enough that I do like emotional intelligence assessments, and I sit down and I'll do all these facilitations, but I've been privileged enough to be able to sit with people after the fact, one-on-one, with their results. And boy, there's a lot of people. It really hit me when I started to see person after person after person that I would be meeting, and they would disclose how they're suffering from, lack of confidence, self-doubt, like questioning everything. And it was almost heartbreaking. Like, we should be talking about that conversation, and how do we equip our leaders so they feel more comfortable with who they are so they can show up. That's one. But that's all emotional intelligence, right? And I think that our structures in organizations, you can say, oh, but I do birthday cakes, for birthdays, and I do all this stuff. And guys, that is amazing. But there is a deeper level of support that's required for leaders. I think that they need to have a better understanding of self. So when we think about our triggers, when things are happening at work, how do we manage that so we're not just stuffing it? So even with myself, like, I'm so excited because I've got the corporate setting, but it feeds into a deeper personal development setting where I do retreats, where I help people go deeper into that emotional solve. Like, why am I stuck? Why is the same thing triggering me? Is it a corporate meeting? Is it that guy? Or is it really me? Like, it's like those conversations where we need leaders like us and others, right, that are helping. This is the shift, Angelina, that I'm assuming that you're referring to, that helping our leaders be well equipped so they can self-regulate, self-manage as they're navigating through that stuff. That is, I think, critical, because if not, you're just putting a Band-Aid. You're not solving the root of the issue. So I will pause there. Thoughts?
Yeah, so before I pass this on to Angelina, just clarification for those who may be new to the idea of emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence, or EQ as it often has been referred to, came out 20, 30 years ago in the literature. It's become very popular. And in fact, there are statistics that say the C-level, on LinkedIn, the C-level job descriptions, when they're recruiting for C-level suites now, the language has changed significantly in the last few years from technical skills to people skills. And so you could say that is a shift towards emotional intelligence being as important or more important than understanding how the corporation works in terms of the internal cogs and wheels, et cetera. But the four basic tenets of emotional intelligence are self-awareness, self-management, and then social awareness and relationship management.
Absolutely.
We don't have to get into all the details on that, but that's kind of what it's based on. Which to me, I'd never heard of emotional intelligence until I went to Pepperdine, and when that was introduced, I was like, well, that's the way I'm wired, right? That is how I show up in the world. But certainly lots to learn on that, and then to give frameworks and understanding of all that, and then the shift, the leader shift, I like to say, between 1.0 and 2.0. I think in some ways you could frame it as from command and control, which much of our corporate culture was based on a military model, which is very, very effective in war. Then you hear about the war room, and you hear about the battles and there's a lot of battle language in corporate America, but that was all based on a very effective model for war, not necessarily so great for relationships. And so what I like to say before I hand this off to Angelina is that I have to remember that an organization is not a building, it's not an office, it's not a computer, it's not a business strategy. An organization is an organism. It's made of people with flesh
I
and
love that.
blood and thoughts and feelings. And if I can keep that in mind, that, as my friend Steve likes to say, it's not a building, it's a body. Because
Yeah.
there's the brains, and there's the heart, and there's the esophagus and the spleen, and sometimes I feel like I'm a toenail, but I'm still important to the entire organization. And if I, as a leader, can remember that these are human beings with lives, and they've got all sorts of issues, some that are related to business and a lot that aren't, then that helps me lead better, rather than saying everybody leave all your issues at the door, which is actually impossible, and come in and do your job. Okay, so Angelina, I'm gonna pause there.
Can I just jump in one point before?
Okay,
just one point, Angelina. Sorry, I just want to simplify that. There's all the technical things. I get it, but it's dropping from mind to heart. How would you feel in that situation? Start asking yourself about feeling. How does that feel? Corporate is like, whoa, what the heck? We don't really care about that. You should better start caring, because that's how the organism gets inspired and motivates and moves and understands and kind of can be extremely productive from a results perspective. But that command and control, it's funny that you say that, because I used to use language like that. I'd be like, yeah, we're going to kill it. And someone had to stop me and say, Kristina, did you hear what you just said? I'm like, but I was like trying to pump people up when I'm like, hey, we're going to kill it. Like, get results. Guys, there's different ways we can communicate. Angelina, sorry.
So I've got a great segue for Angelina here, and I'm not putting you off at all. I think this leads right into what I know Angelina loves, and so I want you to imagine with me, both of you, and those who are listening, a figure 8 that goes around your head and then crosses at your neck and then goes around your heart.
Oh,
it's
nice!
Really, it's an infinity sign, right? Yeah. It's an infinity sign turned vertical, and so I call this, and I didn't make this up, right? This is mind heart coherence.
Yes.
And so I think there's a lot of leaders that have grown up in the command and control thing, and they're like, I'm not going to switch to heart leadership. One, I don't know how, and two, I don't even think it works. So it's not an either or. I just want to frame it as a both and it's a circulation, right? So you got your mind and all of the thinkers that are working, and go down into the heart where your emotions are, and it's a constant flow. It's never static. Everything's always in motion, and that's happening in me. It's happening in each individual in the organization, and it's happening on a systems level, which I think that leads directly into what I would expect Angelina to share here. So go for it.
Well, we do. We are, children, products of our culture.
Yes.
And that culture has a number of constituents. And as we are tiny people coming up in the world, like, we can put this into the corporate context, but it's really in the cultural context, what we're describing. There are a number of systems that all of us from a very early age find ourselves beholden to. And there's always an author, an authority, an author of reality, whether it's in the home or whether it's in the classroom or whether it's at university or whether it's at work, right? And so these structures, and at every single one of them, every single level of development, as we are becoming acculturated into our macro and micro cultures, we are negotiating and learning how to all kinds of things. So there's this emotional intelligence that we're talking about is something that all of us as human beings are actually born with. We all know how to feel.
It's the best. Yeah.
Yes, right.
Right? And as little children, we don't have a story about any of our emotional experiences. And as children, as little children, all of our emotional experiences, interestingly, have a beginning, middle, and end. And as we come up through these different systems, we learn how to stop the sensations, because what we're talking about is sensations that are going on inside of our own system. So that we can continue to belong with the outer system. So the inner system gets kind of stopped, right?
Yes.
And then we wind up being in our middle ages with a bunch of emotional artifacts that are just kind of hanging out in our system. And then we try and be a leader, and we're constantly being triggered by everything around us. And we think that it's the job, and we think it's the wife, and we think it's whatever, right? And so it's a human thing that we're talking about. in the context of leadership in corporate specifically, that's even more taboo to bring this human dimension of ourselves. But this is the shift that is occurring because corporate is starting to recognize that people are anxious, they're depressed, they're super competitive, and really basically very unhappy. Many people are just showing up into their jobs just to get their paycheck without any buy-in into what it is that the objective of the greater structure is, right? And this is starting to show up on the bottom line, basically. There's a lot of wasted time and a lot of wasted energy and a lot of unnecessary problems that are bringing this more into our awareness, and we're starting to go, oh shit, like we've got to, excuse me, but we've got to do something different because this obviously is no longer working. There was a time perhaps where it was, where it did work, right?
Sure. Yep.
But the emerging paradigm has gotten more, there's more heart in it.
Well, I would say it's definitely, there's a heart-led component, but usually organizations don't understand that until you explain what really you mean by that. It's not
but this is again a cultural thing, right? Because the same kind of breakdowns in communication happen in family systems, right?
True.
Right.
Let me jump in with a story here. I'm going to jump in with a story that will illustrate exactly what we're talking about. I couldn't agree more with what both of you have said. It's where my heart beats, but I love the illustrations because I think they can picture a story, then they can pin the principle on it. And so I heard this from, I don't know if it was Simon Sinek or John Maxwell. I think it was actually a conversation between the two of them. And they talked about how they went to this one hotel. I think it was maybe a Ritz or Carlton, because they're very, very famous for their high-level, world-class service. And this bellhop that wasn't even serving one of these guys, they got to their room and they found out that the sheets hadn't been changed or something, which is really unlike the Ritz-Carlton. So they call down to the desk, and the desk says, oh, we'll send somebody as soon as we can. And a bellhop goes by and overhears the conversation. He wasn't assigned to the room. It wasn't his responsibility. He says, I will help you, sir. And he took him up to the 20th floor to the VIP room, and there was refreshments and a very comfortable place for the guy to stay while the room is being redone, and made him feel super at home. I think the guy's name was like Norman or something like that. Well, it turns out Norman wasn't ever asked to do that. Norman just knew this is the Ritz-Carlton way, right? And his supervisors applauded him and praised him for it and said, thank you so much. And he was taking a risk. He didn't know that this guy had access to the VIP room or not. All that to say, it went incredibly well for the guest. Then the next week, they moved to the hotel across the street, and I don't remember what the name of it was. It wasn't the Ritz-Carlton for sure. And the same guy who had this great experience, he's at the desk checking in, and he sees Norman, and Norman's over here doing something. He's got his head down, he's got his shoulders hunched, he's very quiet, and I think it was Simon. I think he says, hey, Norman, what's going on? And Norman just barely peeked his head up and then kept his head down and kind of acknowledged that he was there, and then just went on his way. And so Simon was intrigued, of course, and he can't help himself. And so he catches Norman in the hallway later. He says, what's wrong? Are you okay? You just don't seem like yourself. And Norman says, if I do anything outside of exactly what I'm told to do, I will get grilled, right? So here's the same guy, the same employee. On one side is flourishing. He's empowered. He's making a difference. And he's full of life. And the same guy across the street, he's shriveled up. He's scared. He's afraid that he's going to get in trouble. And it wasn't the difference in the person. It was a difference in the culture. And the culture, there's a reflection, of course, of the leadership. So I think that it illustrates to me, anyway, why this is so important. Because we don't want, I hope what we don't want is employees who come in and do the job because they have to, so then they can leave the job and do what they want to. But why wouldn't you want your corp, your employees to thrive, and not just so that they're happy, but because good employees, happy employees, do their job better, they perform better, and actually it increases the productivity and the bottom line anyway. So it's a win-win all the way around.
I have a personal story. I was like, and senior leaders, I've worked for multiple organizations, so you'll never know which one or where or whatever. Right. But it's about the messaging. I had a conversation with someone. I was like, oh, it's intuition. Like, you have to use your intuition, and you can use the logic and data. I think that that's when it makes you super effective. This person was very senior, very triggered by the idea that I mentioned intuition. Wanted to really make it clear that intuition was not important, not like, that, because it took me away from marching orders, I guess, because all of a sudden I wasn't listening to my intuition the way that I would want to. Now I know this, right? But I think it's interesting because I was in a pretty senior level role and I could push back and had that conversation. But if you have other people, that you have leaders in play that don't believe in this, then it doesn't matter. But you have to look at the overall results, right? As you said, do you want happy employees that are going to be highly productive? I think it's like 25% more productive than, I don't have the stat in front of me, but it's
significant.
ridiculous.
It's significant.
And have a joyful experience. Or do you want, is the control? And if you ask me, control is about power, control, fear. I could go into the whole thing, but I'm not going to. But I think as leaders, we have a choice every day to decide, what kind of leader are you going to be? Are you going to be someone who is trying to put a square peg into a circle hole and forcing it in? Or are you going to actually see what you have and make sure that the fit is effective and that you're leading effectively? I still, that conversation blows me away because it was very, I would say very aggressive, because they were not happy with the fact that I was not just believing only in data. And I think that, it's funny because my intuition has only gotten stronger and it has led me this whole other direction. But if I didn't listen to that, I would have lost a part of myself there. Right. So I think it's, it's human beings, not human doings. So I think we need to remember how we're interacting and engaging with people. So that's a little bit of my storytelling today.
Right. And, I think there's, to talk to Angelina's idea about systems and culture, right? So you see this in hospitals is a good example where the person that came up through the ranks had to work for a week without any sleep and, and had to go through all of these hardships in order to earn their status. And so now they, of course, expect that everybody that comes up behind them will have to do the exact same thing. And they hold them to that exact same standard, which on the surface, that seems, that must be the process, right? Well, it turns out doctors don't actually do very good when they're working on lack of sleep, right? And do you want a surgeon, not a surgeon in particular, but do you want a doctor working on you who's hasn't slept in the last 48 or 72 hours, who's basically running on caffeine? Or would you rather have a doctor who's got a good sleep and their minds are working well and all that kind of stuff? But all that to say, the inheritance, we only teach what we know and we only know what we've received. So you see this in parenting, of course, as Angelina talked about, it's family systems. And so the reason I think Leadership 2.0 fits so well is we're trying to interrupt a pattern. There's this triangle I came across, has an eye in every corner. The eye at the top is to identify or inspect. And then one of the corners is interrupt. And the third one is install. And it goes around and around and around. And so I think we're in this triangle where we've done the same old thing over and over again. And then, of course, expecting different results is insanity. There's another eye. but if we don't inspect, we won't know that it's there. There's the awareness. And now we're talking about interrupt. We interrupt the pattern, not just for interruption's sake, but so that we can install, that's our third eye, something new, which is more effective. But you don't stop there, right? A solution is not forever. A solution is for a contextual set of circumstances. So you identify and investigate, interrupt and install, and then you go around and around again. And I think what we're trying to do here is encourage organizations to see themselves as organisms and say, what patterns, although they were perfectly appropriate at the time they were installed, now no longer serve us. They don't serve us, they don't serve our stakeholders, they don't serve our shareholders for that matter. So let's interrupt that, install something new, and go around the triangle again. Okay, Angelina, jump, please.
Yeah, what's coming to mind is just the simple concept of including our humanhood, right?
Say that one more time. It cut out just a second. Say it again.
Of including our humanhood.
Okay, very good.
Right?
Yes.
Including our humanhood in how we lead our own lives. And this all by itself makes us a better leader.
Agree.
When this thing is going on inside that is, like our emotions are where we, all human beings, we're sentient beings. That means we feel, right? Our emotions are where we are experiencing our lives. And when we uninclude this dimension of where we as beings our lives are happening, it's not sustainable. We can't expect the highest possible outcomes. And then the other piece that was coming to mind is that the models that are emerging are more about leading with or power with systems,
Agreed.
right? Than power over, which is what we have all kind of been templated with, what we've all inherited. And so power with systems are really about leaders inviting the leadership, like making a context where the leadership of everyone that they are leading is welcome.
Agreed. And I think that it's interesting because I see that, but not everyone has adapted that model because some people don't even know how to as of yet, right? It's bizarre to me, right? So we like to drop the word, we're inclusive, we do this, and this is, this is me. I'm a bit of a truth speaker. I'm going to say, like, these checkbox, right? Bring it, right? But these, organizations can do better, right? So these check boxes that we put into place, like, oh, we're inclusive. We did this. We invited a girl to the party, or someone. We did this, right? Like we the token person has been here, but that is not. You are missing the boat because the beauty of it is, regardless of how you come, it's about the diversity of thought. How are you embracing those conversations and bringing it in? If you have a senior leader that it's their show and they have the right answer, or they have not learned the skill to listen and promote healthy dialogue or encourage like brainstorming and whatever, they could seriously miss an opportunity there. So it's not baked into the culture. And that I do a lot of culture work. So it's kind of like when I see organizations, I'm like, you're telling me you're this, but you're not, guys. Like you haven't seen that you haven't fully baked it in, because if you did bake it in, you wouldn't have to tell me you're it. It would just, it would bubble up and show.
You're talking about an entire skill set that is as a leader, if that leader is curious about having for themselves a nicer experience of being in their leadership role.
Right. Correct.
They themselves would have to actually adopt a completely different skill set. This is across the board for pretty much all of us humans. Like how I think and how I feel are intrinsically intertwined. How I feel matters.
Yeah.
And if I can learn how to use my mind in order to include my feelings and actually have a constructive relationship with them, then I become a better leader.
Yeah.
And what that means is now I am somebody who's on this journey of including this dimension of my being, which means that I am somebody who is capable of holding that kind of space for my teams, for the people that I'm leading, right?
Yes.
So it has to start somewhere.
Yeah. And I would say even more, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I just get excited.
Fine. Jump in.
The core value of what success is needs to be repurposed because success has been taught, right? It's been taught in a way, and I fell into it, guys. Like, I'm not going to be here all preachy. That is not it. This is about learning, right? I fell into it where it's like, success is if I get the promotion. Success is if I make all the money. Success is if I get the title. But that is not, that is a self-made definition of success. Right. What is success? And I think that those are bigger conversations. If you really could get organizations to start embracing how we look at, success, a fully functional,
being kind of like, you know, where they're highly productive in a workforce, I think that could be successful. Like, but it's taking it away from the I and shifting it into the we. And they have not all organizations have gotten there yet. So this is the future.
Yeah.
It's just,
no,
it's not really a part of
not
the
even
cultural
close right now.
Right? So people like us get to kind of seed these kinds of conversations. Really.
Yes.
So there are rays of hope. And I'm seeing it probably because of what I'm looking for. And we all know that our brain works such that we find what we're looking for. If we believe it, then we'll see it, as opposed to I'll believe it when I see it. That's a whole nother conversation. But because I'm immersed in this and I'm so sold on it for my own well-being as well as for my family and my organization, thankfully I'm seeing evidence that there's a shift going on. We talked about the change of the language in CEO job descriptions, but also, so one of the most, I mean, to talk about military command and control, that's where we started here. One of the most structured organizations is the military, and Simon Sinek is friends with one of the highest level trainers for a Navy SEAL team, which is the elite of the elite, the most efficient system that we know of in our country anyway. And so he had this unique conversation with this leader, and he said, okay, let's say there's, oh, I know what it was, is the person he was interviewing said, so in every organization, there's these two different leaders, and sometimes it's a person and sometimes it's a style or system. He said, but there's the one leader that knows everything about everything, has been around for a long time, or she's been around for a long time, and could answer any technical question that you have about your organization, and as such has been promoted up the ranks to a very high level of authority, but they have zero emotional skills, and as a result, zero connections with anybody in the organization. Now they hold the highest title, they've got the biggest salary, and they're very valuable because of all the information that they have right at their fingertips, and they understand it, right? They understand how the structure and the process. And he said, most people in the room will say, oh yeah, and they can put a name on that person in their organization. And they said, and there's also a leader in your organization, or maybe more than one, who doesn't have nearly the knowledge of the technical aspects of your organization, but everybody flocks to this person. And they stand at the water cooler, quote unquote, and everybody wants to tell them what's going on, and if they have any fears or concerns or issues, they talk to this person, even if it's not their supervisor, because this person gets them and they connect with them and they support them and encourage them and all that kind of stuff. So Simon, he poses the question. He says, okay, so there's cutbacks, everything goes haywire, and you have to eliminate one of these two positions in your organization. Which one do you cut first? And the leader, the trainer of the SEALs, of the highest level structured command control organization in the world, says, oh, you cut the guy with the knowledge first in a heartbeat. And Simon Sinek says, why? He says, because you can teach that stuff. That's information. But it's really tough to teach the other part, that emotional intelligence. That takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of consciousness. And oftentimes people have inherited it from their own family systems as well, which is why they bring it into the workplace. He said, but you can teach that guy the information, but taking the guy that knows everything and trying to get him to be a emotionally intelligent and sensitive person, he says that's quite an uphill climb. And that was supposed to be a positive, and it should come across either way, depending on how you interpret it. But all that to say, it's a real life story that says even in the most efficient organizations, they understand, they're seeing and making adjustments that the humanity, as Angelina talked about, the human element is what makes organizations work, because they are organisms, right? They're not organizations, they're organisms. And then there's this movement called conscious capitalism, which is spreading pretty well across our country, which actually is intentional about saying, if you're going to be capitalistic, there's nothing wrong with that, unless you grind up the souls of the people that work for you, right? So rather than it being shareholder orientation, they call it stakeholder orientation, which includes the leaders and the line workers and the people that service the vendors, the community, the environment. They put all the stakeholders in the pot, and they say, how can we serve all of them well? And as it turns out, like you said, the statistics bear out that conscious leadership and conscious organizations actually are more efficient. And here's the biggest deal, in my opinion, is that the turnover goes way, way down. And anybody who's been in leadership for very long will tell you the turnover is so costly, because you have to take somebody in that doesn't know anything about the organization and train them up. It takes time, it takes money, and all that human capital is gone. So when people feel engaged and important and heard and understood and supported, they don't want to leave the organization because they know that's pretty rare, right? So they stay and they're loyal, and then you got the turnover goes down and everybody thrives, including your bottom line. All right, I'll pause there.
Well, and I'll say, like, I say that to clients all the time, right? It's like, I would hire for attitude over skill set any day. I would when I would deal with challenging situations, if someone had a poor attitude in the group, it's toxic. It definitely impacts the entire group. It's almost like it spreads. Like you can literally watch it spread.
Yeah.
So
it's a virus.
Right.
Lowest
So you
lowest common denominator.
Right.
Thing.
So you have to, even, many times throughout my career, I would hear, oh, but they're so good at their job. They're great, but they're awful to people. They're awful to their surroundings. They're horrible, insubordinate almost to their leaders or whatever. And there's many organizations, and if they're listening, it's okay, right? Like you put up with it, but you don't have to put up with it, because just as you said, you're hurting yourself in the long run. Yes, you might be holding on because you think that they're a high performer, but the damage that's happening when you're holding people that are not healthy for the culture, it's not worth it. So yes, I would always say attitude first over skill set.
Absolutely.
Angelina, go ahead.
Yeah, thinking about like what it would take because this is something that I have helped small companies kind of navigate. And in the first time that I did it was not intentional, but that was what ended up happening, because very quickly I came to understand, like, oh, I see. And the person that had the attitude problem was actually the head of the organization. Right?
Yeah.
And
surprise.
Right. And so it was interesting because it didn't take a long time to transition this system.
Sure.
But what was required was an amount of time and some inquiry that was very specific, that was able to give the entire organism a 360 of itself.
Yeah.
Without anybody being like outed for anything, right? It was totally safe. But what was revealed in the data that we gathered was what was the thing. And then that person who was the head at receiving the information without being able to have any idea what specific who, what, right? We're just looking at data now. Because they were in and of themselves on a path of growth, they valued that, right? They took that information and made some adjustments. They adjusted their relationship with the organism, with the organization itself, to one that was more comfortable for them. The whole process revealed to them that the relationship that they were having with the organization was kind of toxic, right? They were just overly responsibling, right? And suffering it, right? And as a result, nobody else was actually being able to share in the responsibility. And it was just this insight that all of a sudden everything just smoothed out. And then that org, which used to look like it had kind of an up-down sort of structure, very organically flattened out.
Right. I believe that.
Right?
Yeah.
It was, and it was a beautiful thing to witness. And it literally, it happened over the course of like 3 or 4 interventions, like a process. We engaged a process, and I met with them in like a total of 4 hours, this whole thing over the course of a couple weeks. Right?
Yeah.
So I'm saying that because I want for anybody that's listening today who is like, right? Like, oh, okay, we've got a problem. How do we do this? Right? Is that it doesn't have to take a long time, because the people that are in your organization are there because they want to be. And all there is for you as a leader to do is contextualize, find a way to create a context where their desire to be there is amplified.
Agreed.
Well put.
Right?
Yeah. Kristina.
Yeah, I know. I totally agree with that. I think that this is why the leadership part is so important, is that you need to have leaders that have managerial courage that will address it. So
Yes.
if you don't have strong leaders in place that would be able to call out like, oh, you know, Joey's acting like this or whatever.
Hey, why
Oh.
Joey?
Hey.
Kidding. I'm kidding.
Sorry, that was subconscious.
I'm not sensitive
I
at
didn't
all.
even mean
No,
to.
I'm not sensitive
What
at all.
happened there? Yeah.
What's
So,
up with Joey?
but anyways, Joey's acting up. The leaders need to feel confident enough, one, that they'll be backed, and two, to know that I don't want this happening in my area, like in my shop per se. Okay. But once you start, as Angelina said, once you start making moves, it definitely starts to shift quite quickly because those people have been waiting for someone to deal with Joey, right?
Yeah.
So,
Hey,
but and you know, if you get stuck, there's always other people that help support if it's complicated or whatnot. But I think the first place is you have to have that self-awareness and call it out. Like, I'm not okay with this behavior in my leadership, right?
Yep.
And when we're passive, you're not helping, right? So get to the root of why you're being passive about it.
So I want to inject into the story that we're telling here now a really important component that we haven't really explored yet, and that is reward system. So a lot of the command control is based not on rewards but on punishment, you might say, right? And that, like the Simon Sinek guy, the bellhop, he kept his head down and didn't do anything outside of his job description for fear that he would be punished. Yet on the other side of the street, he went way outside of his job description and made decisions without any approval from authority to save this customer and help the customer and the client, or the customer and the hotel both win, right? Because why? Because he was rewarded for that impetus, for that self-awareness, for going the extra mile. So the difference is so important. And our old systems, Leadership 1.0, unfortunately, I think are still relics of, okay, we're not going to reward you when you do great, except for maybe a promotion. And depending on the organization you're in, that might only come by attrition, right? Or maybe a longevity raise, which isn't that fulfilling for your employees. But if you do something wrong, I'm going to tell you about that right now, right? I'm going to squash that. And so that
you don't want to be the hammer.
Yeah,
they're
to the
walking
point of like public
right?
humiliation, right?
Oh,
so everybody's going around trying to avoid being publicly humiliated instead of like going all out and doing it.
Right.
Well, and it goes deeper, Joe. It goes deep. Because it's about trust. Do you have trust
100%.
built into your organization? And if you don't, then you're going to have to, that's why the command and control is so important, because we got to hit people back into place instead of trusting and empowering them to make choice. Now, you can go even further. How do you deal with failure, right? Do you humiliate them, as we just said, and like make people feel awful? So no one's going to ever take a risk if you do that, right? Exactly. But if you look at failure and you're like, okay, what did you learn from this? Like growth mindset stuff, and be able to move forward, you're going to have a whole different level of output. That's guaranteed. But if trust is key.
If freedom is welcome, it creates a context for the innovation, for the genius that's latent in the team.
I love that. Yes.
Right?
Genius.
So I just want to amplify that. Not just welcome, which that's the great first step into what we're talking about, but rewarded. We haven't really talked about reward systems here. And I think this is so important. And it might just be recognition. It's not just an attaboy, pat on the back behind closed doors, but rather than the public humiliation, some sort of public acknowledgement that this person went above and beyond the call of duty. My uncle, who was a helicopter pilot in Vietnam, got shot down several times behind enemy lines. I don't know how the heck he survived. Wow. He ended up dying of the Agent Orange many years later, of the exposure to Agent Orange. But he was rewarded medals of valor, including Purple Hearts. Why? For going above and beyond the call of duty. So here's actually a command and control organization, the military, which we're sort of saying is an old version, but they know that if they reward publicly, if they put a pin on your shirt that says, look at that. They saw what I did and they rewarded me for it. And now I can walk around with a sense of pride. Now we don't have to give people badges to wear, and most people wouldn't do that anyway. But there must be some sort of, oh, we lost you, Kristina.
Oh,
there must be
no.
some sort of reward system built into the structure so that people know not only is it welcome to have an idea that may work or may not, but when it does work, there is a reward, an intrinsic reward and an extrinsic reward.
And
What do
it
you
could
think,
be
Angelina?
something, absolutely. You know, Mel Robbins talks about it in the high five habit. She talks about
Oh,
the
yes, right.
power of the public, you know, the public high five. There aren't any words associated with it, and it only
Right.
takes a second.
Yes.
But when somebody gets that kind of like, there is like data that they have discovered, you know, that they like are realizing that more than words of acknowledgement or affirmation, more than rewards, the high five is the reinforcer because it's nonverbal, it's physical,
Right.
and it's often public,
Yes. Right.
right? It says
Yes.
so many things on such a much deeper level. So something as tiny as that, integrating that into the way that we just be like, and it doesn't have to be for a big win either. It
Yeah.
could be for just like catching an error on
Yes.
an important report,
Yeah. A
right?
typo.
Right
Right.
before
Yeah.
the right before the report goes out, right? Something as tiny as that, because whether it's a big save or a tiny save, that public high five is super powerful,
Right. Right.
and it
I'm
takes
glad
nothing.
I'm glad you said that. Yeah. So if people haven't read Mel Robbins' The High Five. Is it the High Five Challenge? Is that what it's called?
It's a high five habit.
High Five Habit. Yeah. It's great on a personal level as well as on a group level. I highly recommend that as well. Yeah. And so to illustrate the opposite side, I've been the recipient of public humiliation, and it makes me want to quit. Right. And sometimes I haven't quit only because I couldn't put food on the table if I did. But that sucks. That's a terrible place to be, and a terrible thing to feel. And I've had leaders who the only time I ever heard any praise was when I overheard it with a conversation with somebody else when they didn't know that I was in the room, right? So they're saying, Joe did a really good job, but they didn't ever tell me. They told somebody else, and I just happened to overhear it. I mean, at least that was something. It made me feel good that, okay, well, behind closed doors, they're not just criticizing me, but how would I know any difference? And so
Right.
even as something as easy as when somebody does a great job, goes above beyond the call of duty, comes up with a great idea, you tell them. What's so hard about that, right?
Right. Well, it's, you know, it's actually very confronting because that requires a little bit of vulnerability that many of us, as we go back, you know, if we go back and circle back around to that emotional quotient or that emotional intelligence, right?
Right,
That's
right.
that's like, I don't like to make broad sweeping generalizations, but I
Sure.
have been really looking at our culture through my own personal inquiry and through now a couple of decades really of looking at humans and the stuff that snags us up. And it's a handful of things, and the ways that we cope with these handful of problems that we really have. Really, it's just a handful, just a few, right? But the way that we cope, and a lot of our coping is around denying that we are having a feeling about a thing, even if it's a good feeling. It's
Right, yeah.
somehow like you're tipping your hand and you're showing that you're weak, even
Sure.
if what you're showing is, I am so pleased with you. Thank you so much. That was so awesome. I can
Yeah.
talk to so-and-so over here about it, but talking to you about it,
Yeah. Oh, I lost you too. Okay,
you
so
know, yeah.
yeah.
It's just
So-
there's nothing wrong here. That's my point.
right,
It's
right.
like there's nothing broken and nothing needs to be fixed. It's just important for us to acknowledge that we are coming from a place that's sort of set us up for the way things are. And fortunately, we're also in a place right now where we're noticing like, hey, maybe this isn't actually working as well as it could be. And there are options. Those options are starting to become more and more available in the way that, you know, in the collective think, as it were.
Right. We're going to go off on a tangent here, and we're almost out of time, but I did want to say that sometimes one of the barriers for this type of leadership that we're describing is just insecurity. And I could talk from my own experience as well as anybody. I've had leaders who, because of their own security, not just in their position, but in their who they are as a person, in their self, they were very open and happy to share both criticisms and praise, and they did it very openly and honestly and with love, right, with support. And so actually the criticism I received from these leaders actually felt like love, because they were helping me learn from my mistakes, see my blind spots, so that I wouldn't do that again. And it wasn't a punishment, it was actually a boost, right, a boost in my career. And those same leaders are the ones who, they wouldn't hesitate to say, man, that was awesome, Joe, I never would have thought of that, I'm so glad you're on the team, et cetera, et cetera. And you get that combination, that's very powerful. But all that to go back to, I think for any of us as leaders, if we have our own insecurities that we haven't worked through, then the idea of having smarter people in the room or rewarding somebody else who's a subordinate only exaggerates that insecurity. Like, well, maybe my job's at risk, or maybe they don't think well of me. But that really, we're just projecting our own insecurities on somebody else. It's our story, and we're blaming somebody else for our lack of emotional intelligence. So we're all responsible for our own. And that's put out there as an encouragement to say, hey, if you land in that role and you have a hard time confronting people, either for doing well or doing poorly, oftentimes that's just a light shining on your own heart to say, well, I got my own insecurities, I need to work on those so that I can be strong and powerful and effective as a leader myself. Well, we're down to about, go ahead.
Yeah, real
Angelina,
quick.
sorry.
Just like anything else, you know, this is like the ray of like sunlight, just like anything
Yes,
else.
right.
Emotional intelligence really boils down to a very simple skill set that literally anyone could learn.
Okay.
Okay. And when I say anyone, I'm talking like preschoolers.
Yep.
Because it's not rocket science. We were all born with feels. We were all born with a mind. And all the skill set is learning how to utilize, leverage these aspects of our human system in a more constructive way. That's it.
Right. Yep.
It's not rocket science. It doesn't take a lifetime to learn. It does, take practice, because you've been practicing a different way for a really long time, but you're not really learning anything as much as you're remembering something.
Good, really good. Yeah. So for those who want a book, who love books, I highly recommend Mastin Kipp, Reclaim Your Power. That's MASTINKIPP, Reclaim Your Power. And it's not specifically a leadership book, except for in the context of emotional intelligence. He dives into oftentimes the way we treat others is based on the trauma, unresolved trauma in our own lives, which shows up as insecurity and all these things that we've been talking about. So that's something, but that as the book title suggests, you can reclaim your power. It actually is your power. You've given it away, and you can reclaim it, as Angelina was talking about, just in a different way. So I think that's very insightful to help leaders reclaim their own power for themselves and for the benefit of their subordinates and for the benefit of their organization. We really have run out. We really have run out of time here. But before we sign off, Angelina, would you let people know how they can connect with you after this broadcast is over?
Absolutely. You can email me at angelinafrost.com, or you can go get a copy of my book, Connection, at angelinafrost.com/gift, or you can do both, and I will be happy to spend some time with you. In fact, one of the ways that I give people a chance to get to know me, and I get a chance to get to know them, is I offer a complimentary, full-blown, not sales session, but full-blown coaching session, just so that people can get an idea of what coaching is, if you haven't ever had an experience of what coaching is, and so that we can see if we're actually even a compatible fit. No matter what, we come out with a new friend, both of us. So there's some mutual gold exchange, right?
Yep.
So yeah, that's it. Thank you very much,
And I can
Mojo. I'm so grateful.
I can give personal endorsement to what Angelina just talked about. I have been the recipient of her coaching session. We actually did it publicly in a live broadcast, which was new to both of us, but powerful. And if you listen to Angelina's talk for very long, you'll hear the word inquiry quite a bit. And I love that, because it's questions, it's probing, it's curiosity. It suspends the notion of judgment that I understand something before I understand something, right? So inquiry, and you and I both went through training for appreciative inquiry, which is a way to assess an organization or to consult it for that matter, rather than figuring out what's wrong with it, you figure out what's right with it and do more of that. That's the basic idea. And that's true for our personal lives as well. So, but I highly recommend the free coaching session that Angelina just talked about. It's been helpful. In fact, what we're doing right now, in many respects, is fruit of what you and I went through that coaching session, however long ago that was. So thank you for that gift as well. You can reach me, Mojo, at the address right there below my picture, mojo.studio. It's the link tree that can take you to all the different things that I'm up to as well. And we will do this again. I don't know what happened to Kristina. I think her connection must have died or battery died or something. But KristinaHolle.com, and that's KristinaHolle.com, and you can find her there and her books, and she's an independent consultant now as well. Also has a podcast. She's an author just like Angelina as well. So for all of you who have tuned in, as I love to say, and Angelina's heard me say this many times and is in full agreement with me, we understand that your time and attention are invaluable, right? When you spend time and attention with us, it's our full-on desire that it's not time spent, it's time invested that will reap rewards in your life, right? But as Robin Sharma says, and I quote him 5 times a day, ideation without implementation is delusion. We can ideate all we want, which is what we have been doing. But if we don't implement, right? If we don't go around that triangle between inspecting to interrupting to installing, that's the implementation here, install, then we haven't really made a change. We just talked about a lot of great stuff, right? So all that to recommend anybody who's tuned in or is watching after the fact, I hope you took notes, rewind it, take down the things that are really important to you. As I love to say, chew it up, swallow the meat, spit out the bones, but save those for later because you might need a toothpick. So on behalf of Angelina Frost and Kristina Holle and Jon Weirauch, who will join us in the future, this is LeaderSHIP 2.0, and it is our hope that we can continue this series every Thursday, approximately 12:30 p.m. Pacific, give or take, depending on individual schedules. So thank you, Angelina, for your time, energy, and attention.
Thank you,
for all those who have tuned in. Until next time, leadership happens. Peace out.